Good morning, 4A, and welcome to our English lesson. Today we're looking at subordinating conjunctions. The three subordinating conjunctions that we're going to be looking at today are because, as, and although. And if you remember, a conjunction is a word we put in the middle of the sentence to join either two clauses or a clause and a phrase together to add extra information. So the first conjunction we're looking at is the word because. Now, because means the reason that something has happened. So, for example, the boy fell out of the tree because he slipped on a leaf. This is telling us that the reason the boy fell out of the tree was that he had slipped on a leaf. The second sentence, the teacher was going crazy because he was trapped in the house all day. This is telling us that the reason the teacher was going crazy is because he was trapped in the house all day. As you can see, the word because there is used in the middle of the sentence to add extra information about the main part of the sentence. The second conjunction we're looking at is as. This means when two things are happening at the same time. So, for example, the boy fell out of the tree as his friends watched in horror. So this is telling you that at the same time as the boy falling out of the tree, his friends are watching in horror. The second sentence, the teacher stared at the kettle like a lunatic as it began to boil furiously. This is telling you that the teacher is staring at the same time as the kettle is boiling. Again, this conjunction is being used to add extra information to the first part of the sentence. The third and final subordinating conjunction we're looking at today is although. This means when something is happening in spite of something else happening. So, for example, the boy fell out of the tree although he was wearing sturdy climbing boots. Now, you would expect someone who was wearing sturdy climbing boots to not fall out of a tree, but he has fallen out in spite of wearing them. The second sentence, the teacher was watching Teletubbies although he had work to be getting on with. You would have thought that if the teacher had work, he would be doing it, but in spite of that, he's watching Teletubbies. Again, although is being used there to add extra information to the first part of the sentence. Now, subordinating conjunctions join a main clause and a subordinate clause. The main clause is the main part of the sentence that contains most of the information, it makes sense on its own, and contains a subject of the sentence. The subordinate clause, although it is a clause rather than a phrase, doesn't make sense on its own and has to be joined to the main clause. So if you take the first sentence, for example, the ancient Egyptians wore eye makeup because they wanted to look exciting. Now, the main clause, the ancient Egyptians wore eye makeup, makes perfect sense on its own, and you could use that as a sentence. If you take the second part, the subordinate clause, they wanted to look exciting, that doesn't make sense on its own, but when you join it to the main clause, it's adding extra information about it. It's telling you that the reason why they wore the eye makeup is to look exciting. Again, if you look at the second sentence, the path of the river meandered as it moved through the landscape. The path of the river meandered is the main clause and makes sense on its own. It moved through the landscape does not make sense on its own, but it does make sense if we join it with the main clause, and using that subordinating conjunction, we've added extra information to the main clause. And the final sentence, 4A have been working hard at home, although they prefer to be in school. Again, 4A have been working hard at home is the main clause and makes sense on its own, contains a subject to the sentence, which is 4A. They prefer to be in school doesn't make sense on its own, but when joined to the main clause does, and this time we're using the although, which is the in spite conjunction. So you can see there how the subordinate conjunctions, because, as, and although, are used to join the main clause, which makes sense on its own and contains a subject to the sentence, with a subordinate clause, which is a clause but doesn't make sense on its own, but when added to the main clause adds extra information. Now, to make things a bit more interesting, we can chop and change them around. So rather than having the main clause, then the subordinate conjunction, and then the subordinate clause, we can change it around. So we start with a subordinate conjunction, then the subordinate clause, and then the main clause. So that first sentence has now become, because they wanted to look exciting, the ancient Egyptians wore eye makeup. As you can see there, after the subordinate clause, we have a comma now. So we have to go subordinate conjunction, subordinate clause, comma, main clause. Again, the second sentence, as it moved through the landscape, comma, the path of the river meandered. Although they prefer to be in school, comma, 4A have been working hard at home. So this allows us to chop and change our sentences around, makes it more interesting for the reader, and allows us to change our sentences to make it much more exciting by putting either the subordinate clause at the end, or we can put the subordinate clause at the beginning with the subordinate conjunction right in front of it. Okay, so now it's your turn. Here are 3 pictures, and I'll provide you some more resources in a bit for you to have a look at. What I want you to do is to come up with lots of sentences using these pictures as inspiration, and I want every sentence to contain a conjunction, either because, although, or as. So remember, every sentence must contain one of those subordinating conjunctions. I want you to make sure it contains a main clause and a subordinate clause as well with your subordinate conjunction. If you're feeling adventurous, you could write your main clause and your subordinate clauses in different colours, or you can underline them in different colours, or you can find some way of separating them out. Have a go at creating as many sentences as you can. These pictures are just here for inspiration, so if you can think of more exciting sentences without using the pictures, you can have a go at those. Okay, I'm really looking forward to seeing how you get on. Have a go at writing me some sentences using subordinating conjunctions. Thank you.